Hello friends, Mr. E here, and I am not baiting you with the thumbnail. No, it's in fact, I think 99% confirmed that we are receiving Admech for our 7th playable character class in Darktide, which is probably only about 5 or 6 weeks away from release, which is really, really exciting, honestly. The time has really flown, and that is awesome because I think, to Fat Shark's credit, they do a really good job on new characters, especially like when RBD's launched. That character was worlds ahead of the design of a lot of the other characters at the time who had not received reworks, and the Hive Scum has amounted to be one of the most complex and fun to play characters in the game. So I think that they definitely have been doing a good job at these new characters, even if the power balance is a little bit all over the place. But what I'll say is that this new character represents a really big make or break moment, right? Because it's Admech. Admech is such a prized sort of IP in the community, and if you get it right, it's going to be massive for the game because people will go crazy to be able to play as a Skitarii. By the way, I do believe it's Skitarii. I'll get into the reasons why in just a second. Yeah, so this could be really, really massive if they get it right, and there's so many cool ideas and stuff to draw from to envision how this class is going to play in the game, how you play a first-person Skitarii. So that's what I wanted to do today, because we don't have all that much information. We have enough that I can pretty conclusively say it's definitely going to be an Admech character of some stripes, but there's been no teasers, there's been no official announcements about the class, so I'm going to use what I know about Darktide in its current game state. I'm going to use what I know about what I would do if I was in charge of designing a class to fit with 6 existing classes, and I'm going to use what we know from the leaks in order to piece together what is this class going to be? Like, how are they going to play? What roles will they fill? What weapons will they have? And of course, I am not the, arbiter of 40k knowledge, far from, right? So if you are a 40k knower, especially if you are big into Admech, let me know in the comments if there's any ideas that I missed here. Of course, I just looked over most of the rule books and was trying to piece that together because we know they pull ideas and concepts for abilities and weapons and stuff from those rule books. So that's where most of this stuff is going to come from. And yeah, so if you're excited to hear more about this new class, because it's certainly going to get announced very soon, probably at Skulls, well, then you got to subscribe to the channel, because I'm like the Darktide guy these days, I suppose. And yeah, appreciate you. Let's start with some very meta, high-level stuff, overarching big picture things. As far as what this class is going to be, just, categorically, I'm pretty well convinced it's going to be Skitarii, and this is going to come down to a couple of the leaked weapons that we'll look at when we talk about the weapons section, because those are usually exclusive to Skitarii Legion, and the second reason being Skitarii are a pretty good narrative fit to what we have here. They are employed as pretty much an army, like a manufactured army that defends Forge Worlds, and we are on a Forge World that needs defense. And I believe that the narrative sort of thrust that the expedition stuff is pushing us towards is that they were searching for a enclave of Adeptus Mechanicus that are somewhere out here. And if we can find them, they have been building an army that could join forces with us and help to retake Tertium and save the productivity for the Imperium. And that would be a great narrative way to wrap in, some Admech support. And of course, we're not going to be on the front lines as a tech priest or something. Those are too lofty. Skitarii are great fits for this sort of thing because they are expendable, right? They get blown up, they get killed. You salvage what you can find of their body, you put them back together with a little bit more metal, and then you re-download their programs into them, and there you go. You basically just like give them the kung fu training like you get in the Matrix, and then they are very adept fighters. So that is, I think, why Skitarii are going to be good here, plus like name recognition and just general fun stuff that Skitarii have that other parts of the Legions really don't. So that's what the class is going to be. Let's talk about what, on a meta level, like I think the abilities and the concepts around the class will be sort of focused on. So I wanted to start here in the same way that I did with my other 2 class predictions, which I think have been pretty dang accurate. And that is with sort of saying, no, we're not going to have this on this class because we have it too many times in the game already. So number one on this list, for example, would be no more charges. We have so many classes that can run in and like hit enemies. Now, I didn't say this with Archetypes because I realized there was one type of charge we didn't have, which was a charge that does some sort of like impact or stun when it hits. And what do you know? We got that with the Archetypes. But now we have Zealot charge. Now we have Ogren charge. Now we have Archetypes charge. This class is not going to have any sort of rush forward sort of attack. There will be no true stealth because stealth is not a good fit for Darktide. It's sort of a jank mechanic to work around. There might be some sort of evasion mechanic where the enemies have a low priority on you, although I think they are steering away from those threat-related modifiers as well. But I anticipate that there might be a possibility of some sort of assassin or berserker role with high agility. Remains to be seen. No circular team buffs. This is one that I contemplated. I was like, okay, how many characters in the game currently have AoE abilities that you stand near the character or the thing on the ground and then you get a buff? And we have Hive Scum with one, we have the Psyker with one, we have Archetypes with one, and those are just the ones that you place down. We even have the Chorus, we have Shout, right? So I'm thinking that whatever this class has, I don't think they will be doing team-wide buffs in the same way of like, hey, just stand in this circle radius around me, or in the circle radius I'm going to paint on the ground and you'll get a buff. I think that has been pretty well explored at this point. I also don't think there will be any companion for this class, like a hard companion like the dog is on the Archetypes where it's always around. I do think, as we'll get into a little bit, that there will be AI companions to the class. I just don't think that they are going to be like, hey, you will always have this thing that's at your beck and call. It's going to do these features. I think that we are going to have Admech like drones or like servo skulls or something like that that will be able to do tasks, but they'll be more time limited or only for a certain, like, do this task and then you expire sort of thing. I don't believe that this class will feature any sniping, even though there are a good number of arquebus and long rifles in general that are on the sort of tables for weapons that this Skitarii use. The game is not really well suited to sniping in the real sense. So if we have a ranged archetype for the character, it will have to be both adept at like medium close range shooting as well as like more long range shooting, because there's so many maps in the game that just preclude sniping in general. I think we found that from the Marksman's Focus Keystone, that it has been reworked to be much more friendly of those close ranges. Then let's talk about like a couple of things that I think that would be very much in need here. CC only alts, but alts that only have crowd control as their function. Insofar as I can think of in the game right now, the only ultimate that solely crowd controls is the Ogren's taunt, Indomitable, or not. That's the charge. The taunt is whatever it's called. The taunt, you know what I'm talking about, right? The only effect that this thing has is to make every enemy do a certain thing and control where they can go. And that is underrepresented in the game when you really think about it, right? Because Psyker doesn't have any that can control enemies in that way. The Archetypes has a very light amount of this with the Nuncio Aquila. The Zealot can, I suppose, hold enemies still with Chorus, but Chorus is like definitely not something you'd want to emulate from a design perspective. Veteran doesn't have any, Hive Scum doesn't have any. So yeah, like we are lacking an ultimate somewhere in the game that you cast on enemies and they are all disabled now. They all move super slow, or they are like a big area of them is stunned, and that could be something that is useful for like lower level players as well as higher level players alike. And I have an idea for where this will go as we get down to talk about specific stuff with weapons and things a little bit later on. Then low impact ults with multiple uses. So we only have two ultimates in the game right now that have multiple charges to them. So we have the Zealot's charge ability, like the Fury of the Faithful, and then wait, is there any others? Am I like crazy? I could have sworn there was another one, but I'm like blanking on it. If it, oh right, the wall. If you are using the Psyker's bubble, but you use the wall version, then you get 2 charges there. So those are your options for ultimates that have maybe not the most game impact, but they are usable multiple times. I think this could be a really cool class to explore something like that, where if you are using these wisely, you can affect a lot of change, and you can store them up to use them all at once, or you can use them as they sort of show up. I think like thinking about different design elements like that would be a good way to start with the bases. So it feels different to use your ultimate than it is to just like, oh, I press the button and now my team gets a big buff, or I press the button and now some enemies die or whatever. Then the last type of ultimate, which I think ultimates are a lot of times the really defining thing about the archetype for the class, is something that has to do with like a percentage charge. I already said like no charges, but not that sort of charge. What I mean is like a battery that you deplete by using the ultimate and then it fills up over time. Because this is something that we actually had in Vermintide 2 with the Barden's Outcast Engineer class. He would crank his Gatling gun, and that would build up your ultimate meter, and then you could use the Gatling gun for as long as you had ultimate meter. And then you had to get that juice back, and you could use it from any percentage. You could have only 10%, and you could use 10% of it, or you could get it all the way to full, and it was up to you to choose how much to use and when. I think something like that could be very, very cool and lead to a lot of interesting decision making with a class like Skitarii. So that's the like big like meta stuff as far as like what I think the builds will be. Let's talk about like, okay, this is the stuff that's definitely going to be on the class as far as like more or less confirmed. And the first one is this class is going to have at least one archetype that is really easy to play. that's going to be like, you know, you can clear Malice or whatever just by kind of face tanking your way through stuff and just going unga-bunga, right? Because Hivescum was really, really hard for a lot of characters. I think that was something that they realized. RBDs had a great reception because, and a lot of players love RBDs and they still play them to this day because a lot of players are really washed, and RBDs is super easy and beginner friendly. And that was a great pick for a first new character for the game, especially when you're getting a bunch of people in. So you don't want to release a character here who is so mechanically complex that all these newcomers who see this game at Skulls are going to bounce off of it and be like, what the fuck? I can't play this garbage. This game is way too hard. So yeah, it's going to be easy to play. At least one archetype will be really, really easy to play. And that's why I think there will be a good breadth of tank talents in here. I think there's definitely a implication that there will be at least a tank archetype of some sort that this class can invest in, where you are going to be a frontliner, where you want to be close to enemies because of what it's going to do to them, as we'll talk about in a second when we get into weapons and those specific archetypes. Also, this class will be very versatile. I think that this class is going to have the ability to really change up like what role it can play in. I think more so than many other classes. I think we're really going to try to have a ranged archetype, a melee archetype, and a support archetype, like all three of the trifecta. I think all of those are probably going to be represented on the class, and that is just because that's sort of like at the core of Skitarii, right? They are what would you call it? Like they're completely like reconfigurable. They're configurable for any environ, and that's sort of by design, that they can be taken apart and given new arms, given new structures and organs and rebreathers and whatever it is in order to fight in different environs. I think that is probably a core part of their design document for this class, is that like, hey, it should be able to fight in any configuration and be useful with all these different things. So being versatile is definitely going to be on the table. Support and utility is definitely going to be a big focus for this class. There's no way that a Skitarii that's, you know, it's all about like, they work in coordination with a legion, and they are sort of captained by like very smart, intelligent people. We have seen so far that like the narrative around the Admech, at least in Darktide, is that they are crafty, they are tinkerers, and we would have to imagine that would extend to their legions. So I'm thinking that this class will be able to like craft or tinker or make something that is very useful for the team at any given time. They could provide that in being a scout role. They could provide that in providing some sort of buffs or even, as I will speculate, I think this class might be like the premier debuffer in the game. That is something that has not been explored very fully yet in the game. We have a ton of classes who offer lots and lots of buffs to the team, right? We have Chorus that offers buffs to the team. We have, Veteran Shout that offers buffs to the team. But as far as the classes in the game that offer debuffs to enemies, we don't really have a huge exploration in that right now. We of course have Skull Crusher that occurs on high impact weapons, but we don't really have many other mechanics in that realm, right? We can just stagger enemies and make them take more damage from that, and then we have Focus Target, and that's about it. So I think that having a class that maybe doesn't do so much direct damage to themselves, or maybe even like in just one configuration they don't do that much direct damage, but they have massive abilities to disable the enemies and make them take more damage in a vast swath, that could be a really, really cool role to play on the team, where you are I believe, what does League of Legends call these? There's a type, I can't remember, like enchanters are the ones above your team, but you know, it's a type of support character, but you don't heal and you don't buff your allies, you debuff the enemies so your allies have an easier job of killing them. That could be a really cool role and is definitely unfilled in Darktide so far, and I would highly doubt that Fat Shark has missed that opening. Then let's show something on the screen here, and this is, of course, a leak that I forgot, or I just actually didn't know that this existed when I made my last video about the Admech leaks, but this more or less to me says that we are going to have one of those little arms behind us. These are called mechadendrites, by the way, I have since recently learned, but a mechadendrite, the creator arm, that is what's got me thinking that this is going to be sort of the one of the functions that we have for the class, that this arm is going to be able to create, I would guess, servitors or drones or something like that, that this can manufacture something on the fly that goes and serves a little purpose. Maybe it can go and detonate on the enemies, maybe it can do whatever. And as we've seen with both the Arbites and the Hive Scum, it tends to be that there is a gimmick for these classes, right? For the Hive Scum, it was the stims, the cartel special, which hasn't been really all that, you know, crazy. And for the Arbites, it's been the dog, which I think is a really good gimmick. Like, that's a very enticing gimmick for the class. And for this class, I think that we are going to have exchangeable parts. I think there's going to be a UI element, like a whole page for the Skitarii, where you can go in and you can swap your mechadendrite. You might be able to swap your legs or whatever else it is, right? You can configure just with a small selection. Envision it kind of like, you know, you have these really big buffs from using a stim on yourself when you're in Hive Scum that you get like a certain percentage of the time, but this will be a passive buff that you get all the time. That might give you like an extra small ability or an extra passive that goes with the class if you choose select part. So for instance, I'm thinking if you had an arm, a mechadendrite that is offensively spec'd that can attack, that could work really well if you're going into an all-attacking build, right? If you're just looking for that much more offense, if this arm is going to target the nearest elite enemy and stun them, or something like that, or do some damage to them every 8 seconds or so, something like that could be really, really cool. Now that would be awesome on an offensive class, but think about it on a tank class, right? Now you have a tank class who might not be able to do as much damage on their own, but they've got this arm that's going to be passively doing damage while you're blocking, while you're stunning. It's the one that's following up and dealing the damage. So you could configure yourself to mix and match. You could be a support character who has a support arm, or you could be a support character who has a arm that can do damage or whatever else it might be. So just think about that. Think about what exchangeable parts there are. There's tons of them, and that's a big core element of the Skitarii Legion, is having those sort of configurable parts like that. I would be surprised to not see it in the game. So now let's talk about weaponry. What sort of weapons can we expect our Skitarii to wield? And there's really a lot to pull from here. If we're going by past standards that have been set, the Arbites had 2 melee and 2 range that were exclusive, and then the Hive Scum had 3 melee and 3 range that were exclusive. I would assume we're going to go in the upper end of that. I would assume that we're going to go for 3 and 3. That seems like a pretty decent amount. And the reason being, instead of being 2 and 2, is because there's just so much variety that you could really be building around, right? You want to really kind of cover for all roles. For the Arbites, he's a tanky frontliner who has some secondary focuses, but there's really not a whole lot in his rulebooks about his arsenal, and a lot of his arsenal has a heavy overlap with existing weapons in Darktide because he's Imperial police. So that's very much represented in the arsenal we're already using. But because the Skitarii Legion are hyper advanced technologically. They have a wealth of stuff to pull from that is not represented in Darktide, and they're going to try their best to pull stuff and put it in that exclusively that is like well outside of what we already have, I would have to imagine. So let's pull up the first of the screenshots that's going to tell us a little bit about what weapons we can expect. As you can see in this one here on the top line, we have the Transonic Sword and the Transonic Knife, and that is got a deluxe edition, or like deluxe skin, right? That lets you know that these are very likely going to be a exclusive weapon to the class, right? Because it's going to have a deluxe edition that comes with the exclusive sets. And whether or not these are two separate weapons is another question, because there are times where the game considers a weapon technically a knife, but it is also technically a sword. In the case of like the Devil's Claw or whatever, it's actually technically like a really, really big like machete style knife in lore. But let's go on the assumption that these are independent weapons, that there is going to be a Transonic Sword and a Transonic Knife available to the class. These weapons will almost certainly have a gimmick, because these are very much gimmick weapons in the lore. What these weapons do fundamentally is they achieve a resonant frequency with the armor that they're attacking, and then they pass through it like atomically, more or less. They vibrate themselves through it, and then they just go right into the flesh, and they just absolutely destroy everything inside. And so these weapons are used oftentimes by like Sicarians, because they're assassin, berserker types, and they just absolutely rend armor. But you know, any Skitarii Legion would have access to them. And as far as how they'll function in the game, and how do we differentiate this from other armor rending effects such as Uncanny Strike, well, I would have to imagine that these weapons will be energized in some way. These will be activatable weapons, and perhaps there is an activated bar that while this is active, it just passes straight through armor, or perhaps there is a attunement phase where you like charge the weapon while you are in close proximity, or you hit an enemy to attune the blade to their resonant frequency of the armor, and then after that your damage ramps up or just does true damage. I would also imagine that maybe there's some sort of mechanic here where as you attack the same target, a la a blessing like Relentless or whatever, you're going to build damage against the target because your attacks become more and more effective as the blade achieves resonance and can penetrate their hide that much better. So that's sort of what I'm imagining for those weapons. And let's talk about the other stuff that's in this picture here before I move on to my other predictions. The Power Sword. So we have two other marks of Power Sword in the game. When it says P3, as it does here, P3 refers to like the third type of that weapon. Now, Power Sword 1 is the Power Sword, the Power Sword, both marks of the Power Sword on the veteran. Power Sword 2 is the Power Falchion, and Power Sword 3 is TBD, right? We don't know yet. And then the Power Maul 1, I believe, is the Ogryn's Power Maul. Power Maul 2 is the Crusher, or maybe it's the Ogryn's Slab and Shield. I can't remember. I can't get that straight. But they're not necessarily marked on the same weapon. They're usually different weapons. So Power Sword 3 here is going to be a new type of powered blade. Now, as to whether or not that will actually be a Power Sword or a Power Falchion or whatever else, or will it be on the Skitarii, I don't know. I tend to think that this actually might not be a Skitarii weapon, or if it is, it's not going to be an exclusive Skitarii weapon, because I think there's so much competition for stuff on the Skitarii to have exclusives that are very much like, you know, emblematic of this class, that devoting that to just being a Power Sword or a Power Maul, it doesn't really give me a whole lot of like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to play with that, because a lot of that stuff is already represented. So this could be a weapon that the class has access to, but I would have to imagine that another class will get access to it as well. So this could potentially be a Power Sword plus Shield that is going to the Zealot, but then also the Skitarii would get it or something. If this could be, maybe the Skitarii is going to be the first character to get a pseudo-exclusive weapon that is shared by only one other character, sort of like the veteran and the Skitarii can use the Power Sword or something like that. Maybe, who knows? As far as the Power Maul here, I know that there is, of course, the Arc Maul, which is a very prominently featured weapon in a lot of Skitarii models. However, I don't think that if we're only going with 3 melee weapons as exclusives, I don't think this will be a one of the exclusives. Reason being, this is so close in design and concept to the shock malls that are already in the game, and it's like virtually identical to the Arbides shock mall that was his exclusive weapon. It's really like, you know, not going to be all that interesting in comparison. I just don't know how at this point you would take a weapon that we already have 3 varieties of and make it a whole lot different. If you're going to do like an arc maul, how is that going to be different than a shock maul and feel different? Probably not significantly enough. Compare that to what I think would be probably the biggest no-brainer inclusion for a 3rd exclusive weapon, which would be the Omniscion Axe. Like, this is just an iconic weapon for the Admech, so it would make a lot of sense that you would see this included with the Legions if they are coming, and that could be pretty cool. TBD though, there's no leaks or anything about it, but that would be if I was going to pick something just off of the rulebooks that would be included that would get a lot of hype and would be something that people would want to play with. That axe would probably be at the top of the list. Now, let's talk about range weapons. I think that range weapons are going to be definitely like a specialty of the class because there is a lot of very high-tech, very cool range weapons that this class has access to. I'm imagining that there's going to be a mixture of like one-handed and two-handed, even though there are, as I said earlier, like arquebus and a lot of long-range sniping things in their sets. I think they're probably going to go for that shorter to medium-long mixed range there because there's just not that much demand in Darktide for long-range stuff. But we want to really be looking at how do these weapons distinguish themselves from other stuff in the game, and that's going to be on special effects. If you look at how the weapons for other classes that have been released, you know, since Arbides was released, all these weapons have something special that stands out, right? So the shotgun has these special shells that you load that have different effects, and those are basically free, and it's also just powerful on its own. You have a shield with the shot pistol. The Hive Scum has the Tox pistol, which is insane, and then you've got dual wielding. You got the stubbers. What are they called? Like the dualies. So yeah, you've got lots of different unique things here. Plenty of gimmicks. They definitely stand out as compared to a lot of other options, and that's why I think that like pretty much every weapon is going to be very different than the current cohort that we've got. And one that I think is just going to be an easy inclusion would be a plasma pistol. There's no other weapons in the game that are quite like the plasma pistol, excepting the plasma gun, which is only on veteran. And this is just an easy inclusion because we already have captains in the game who are using plasma pistol, and it's like one of the most prominently featured weapons on the models. Because one thing you'll notice about Fat Shark and their design for new classes is they love to pull from existing models. They love to look at the weapons that the existing miniatures are featured with, and probably the most prominent one is the plasma pistol. So that would be a big hype one for tons of people. I would also imagine that we would see radium weapons. A radium carbine could be your two-handed, more long, medium-range weapon, especially if you're going for like a hunter-killer archetype. If you're going with a radium carbine, I'm betting, because these are radium weapons, as we'll talk about in a second, there are lots of aspects and archetypes of the Skitarii Legion that deal with sort of toxically poisoning the enemy with radiation, which they are more or less immune to because of their mostly mechanical composition. So if this radium weapon is able to debuff enemy stats that you hit, right, putting some sort of like weakness on them or slowness, something like that, like not only is it a pretty strong like sniping and single target weapon, but it can disable other targets if you put enough rounds into them. It lowers their base stats and makes them move slower and attack and be weaker, because we don't really have, that I can think of, any other weapons in the game right now that aren't just killing enemies in different ways. We'd like to see a range weapon here that can actually be used to debuff enemies, that can make them weaker to other sources of damage, as well as like making them do less damage and be less effective in combat. And then finally, one that I think would be just such a cool fit for like a ton of different synergisms within even just the class, but across the whole team, would be the Phosphor Pistol. The Phosphor Pistol has a basically a function in the tabletop, like in the rule sets, that if you tag a target with this, all other targets that attack this target, it basically like puts a big fucking flare. It makes them like lit up with white phosphorus. Certainly they might take burn damage or something, but I think primarily this will act as like focus target the gun, where when enemies are targeting this phosphor target, they're going to deal extra damage. They might have extra armor penetration. They are going to hit more crits or whatever, and it's going to be visible to everybody because this target is freaking glowing. So this will be a great, like, maybe not, it won't do huge direct damage to bosses itself, but it sets up for everybody else to go ham on this target that's lit up. And one thing that I think they could really do with this weapon is to have it act as it does in the rule set, where when a target is tagged with phosphor, and then you have other weapons that are smart weapons, so the Admech can have like missile packs and stuff that are then automatically targeted to that. So if you had like a grenade, maybe one of the grenades is like a missile volley or a flechette volley, if those weapons automatically target themselves to the phosphor target, that could be a really, really cool synergy and allow you to really kind of like burn down primary targets. I think they'd be a very, very cool inclusion, and it would be using aspects or using things that we've already seen in the game, right? There's already systems for telling projectiles to target certain targets, a la Assail, and there's already systems in the game for making targets that are tagged take more damage, a la Focus Target, so you could just combine that. There you go, Phosphor Pistol. Okay, now what about other weapons? What about the generalist weapons that most classes have access to? What of those weapons are going to be brought to this class? Number one on here, Shock Maul has got to be on the class, right? Because we already have, the Shock Maul in the game, and it's represented as well in a lot of the models, right? They call it the Arc Maul, but yeah, it's more or less the same thing. Question mark, are we going to get the Power Sword? Are we going to get some variant of the Power Sword that is shared between the Veteran and this class? TBD, it would be very cool. It would definitely fit if the Legions had Power Swords, but I don't know what Fat Truck's feeling is on breaking the exclusiveness. If they were to take that quote-unquote exclusive from the Veteran and make it not exclusive, it can also be played in Skitarii, would that devalue it? Would that make people want to play Veteran less? I don't know. So they might be hesitant to do that. Chain weapons are almost certainly going to feature on the class, because they're mechanical to some extent. Hey, maybe that will mean that the chain weapons will finally get the rework they deserve and be functional. Right now it's pretty much like just the Eviscerator that has any relevance. And then we'll probably see some sort of like defensive weapons like the Devil's Claw, just basic weapons, probably like the combat axes. I don't think that we will be seeing the agile weapons like the dagger and the dueling sword. As you notice, the last two classes they put out have not had access to the dueling sword or any of those weapons. I think they are reticent to include those on more characters. And then we will probably also see some things like the Crusher for frontliner, more tanking characters. So yeah, that's what I would assume we would get for melee. For ranged, we're definitely getting las guns, right? We're definitely getting the las pistol, heavy las pistol, recon las gun, infantry las gun. Probably not the Hellbore, since that is a Veteran exclusive, or is supposed to be. And then, of course, we'll get auto guns, because those have to be on every freaking class to try and pressure you into using their dog shit. Bolt guns, 100%. We're going to be seeing like bolt pistol at the very least on the class, because yeah, high tech and very much in the 40k vein. And then maybe like a shredder auto pistol or something, right? So like, yeah, pretty standard fare as to what you could see here. I would just assume that we will not be seeing the dueling sword and the Katachan like combat knife. The ones that have Uncanny Strike, I bet those aren't going to be on there in no small part because we already have the Transonic Sword and Transonic Knife here, which are supposed to fill those roles already. All right, now let's talk about, to me, the most interesting part, which is trying to predict what the archetypes are going to be. What sort of, sort of gameplay niche will your current class fulfill. And so far in the game, we have generally had 3 archetypes on every character. So I think I would be hard pressed if I was Darktide or a Fat Shark to go outside of that and do like, oh, we're going to do 4 for this one, which leaves me in a bit of a predicament because there's at least 3 or 4 here that I think would be really good, that I think they would actually be a very good fit for being a character in Darktide. So let's go over them, and I'll kind of give you an idea of what the main ability of the class would be and what the supporting talents would be built around. Because normally, you kind of have like a vertical slice of talents on one side of the tree that relate to those. The first of which I would think would be the Vanguard. The Vanguard is going to be the easy to play tank character. There's definitely going to be a tank archetype here. They've got to have something so that everybody can participate in using this character. And the Vanguard is a type of Skitarii that are armor plated. However, their armor is highly irradiated, and that is both, it's like a double-edged sword. So they, unfortunately, live pretty accursed lives of being radiation poisoned and burnt. Like their skin is probably covered in boils and stuff underneath that. However, the radioactive nature of their armor is deleterious to enemies' health. So enemies that are engaged in close range with them are overcome by radiation sickness. They can't fight as effectively. They're slowed. They're more easily stunned, whatever it is. So I think this would be a cool, very cool thing that we have not explored yet in the game, right? A AoE effect. Maybe it doesn't necessarily directly harm enemies nearby, but they take stacking debuffs of like slowness, or the we currently have effects in the game that slow down the enemy's attack speed, where they attack much less frequently. That would make them a very effective frontline fighter. You just want to get yourself as close to as many enemies as possible and debuff them, make them get radiation poisoning, and then you go to town on them. And this would be a great way for players to contribute and be a effective frontline fighter without necessarily having the most personal skill. I don't necessarily think that it will do radiation burns and just straight up kill stuff, because as we saw with the dog, right, they don't want to produce a character that can literally just turn on their ability or whatever it is and then just walk through enemies, because on lower difficulties, you would very much run the risk of doing that. But this character, I would assume, is going to have a lot of talents related to corruption resistance, or maybe even complete corruption resistance, as it is pretty much the Vanguard is deployed to hostile planets. Like, they're deployed to planets with no atmosphere or really, really toxic environs. They are hyper resistant to that sort of stuff. And so what I'm imagining is that because these Skitarii are designed and they are, kind of built around the tertian wastes, they are probably going to be radiation immune, and they can probably stay as long as they want in the expeditions, like Endgame's, Fortnite Storm era. They don't get killed by corruption damage over time effects like that at all. And they might even have an ability here. This is where I was talking about earlier, with an ability that can just have like a charge to it, like a percentage charge. They might have the ability to toggle on their radiation, like emitting armor, or toggle it off in order to damage enemies when they're near them and conserve it when they're not. And that could be at a trade-off to your own HP, where as you keep this on longer and longer and longer, your HP gets lower and lower, but the damage that you're outputting, like the amount of debuff stacks over time or whatever it is, it gets more and more dangerous for enemies to get near you. And that is something that could allow like higher end players to play sort of on the edge, sort of like a martyrdom style, where you have this incredibly dangerous AoE effect around you, but you're also on low HP. Or you could conserve that and not use it but when you're surrounded by hordes, and then you just have a lot of HP to work with and be more tanky on the back end. So yeah, I think that would definitely be something here. I'm imagining some sort of trade-off mechanics where like you can choose to lower your own HP for some sort of reward of poisoning nearby enemies. The second type of archetype that I would anticipate will be here, I spoke earlier about a crowd control support utility sort of archetype for the Skitarii, and this would be the Infiltrators, the Sicarian Infiltrators. The Sicarians more or less are when a Skitarii legion gets turned into a human nugget, they get taken back and augmented, like extra, like super augmented, and then they can put a bunch of cybernetics and stuff into them that make them able to do things that would normally be pretty deleterious if they were a little bit more organic. But what the Sicarian Infiltrators here can do is they can neurally assault the enemies. They can overwhelm them with audiovisual stimulus that's broadcast basically like directly into the eardrums and the brainwaves, and more or less effectively have stealth, but it's stealth through incapacitation. So I think that this, if they're going to have a CC only ability, it would be a great fit for an Infiltrator style setup where the Infiltrator can AoE stun. He can more or less say like, okay, all these enemies here, they are now disoriented for the next 5 seconds. They are now grabbing their heads a la like these when the Psyker's brain burst is about to go off and the enemies just stop what they're doing and they grab their head. Just have them be stuck in that animation for 5 seconds. That would be a very effective ult, right? To be able to do that. Just stop every enemy in a certain radius in their tracks, without necessarily being able to do any damage. Perhaps even this could be some sort of like cone effect or something like that. I don't necessarily know how that would work. The second thing that is notable about the Infiltrators is that they do have really advanced information relaying capabilities. They tend to have like 360-degree vision and stuff like that. So how that would work in the game, one thing I've noticed over the past couple releases is that they tend to be putting at least something on each one of these classes that will highlight enemies for you. So execution order on the Archetypes highlights priority targets that you or the dog should be killing. The Desperado ability highlights close range targets that you should be killing so you can get your refunds. I think that perhaps the designers of these classes have realized that Darktide is visually not the most clear game in the world, and so enemy highlights would be a very valuable thing to have, especially if you are a information relaying sort of utility focused character. So I don't necessarily know if they will enable this to be highlighting it for all your allies, because that seems like it's stepping on the toe of execution stance a little bit, but I could certainly see an archetype here. At least one of the archetypes here, maybe the one I'm about to talk about, will be highlighting enemies for you to take out. And that brings me to the ranged DPS archetype that I think is possible, which would be the Ranger, the Skitarii Ranger. Now this is like the most default setup of the Skitarii possible. It's probably the one that you've seen the most often, goggles, big red robe, huge sort of radium carbine or arquebus or something like that. These guys are hunter killers. They are big game hunter style characters. I'm imagining the radium carbine will go well here. We'll want more precision, and we will have sort of talents that are all about hunting for elites and hunting for bosses. One thing that I think hasn't been really expounded upon a whole lot in the game is we do, of course, have execution order on the Archetypes, where when you kill marked targets a certain amount of times, you get stacking damage to monstrosities. Perhaps there could be something with that that is related to like a stacking buff for killing targets, although it's kind of a hard balance to strike, because when you kill elites is completely dependent on your difficulty, right? So that might be something that's not very useful on lower difficulties, which a lot of these classes are designed to play as well in. So yeah, I'm definitely thinking this character here is going to have some potentials to be a special elite remover, boss killer, boss debuffer, whatever it might be. Yeah, there's just being a prolific hunter. And then finally, and maybe this one honestly is pretty interesting. I'm split between whether the Ranger or this one will appear. The Sicarian Ruststalker. So these guys are like berserker attackers. And the problem you'd have here is differentiating it from the Zealot, or differentiating it from the Hive Scum, who is also a mobile attacker. I know I said no charges, but what about like a Pounce, right? Because these guys are like cybernetically enhanced. They have like all their legs and stuff replaced, so they could do a hunter style, or like a what do you call it? The Skaven assassin. I can't remember the name of him right now, but like that sort of style where you pounce to do a very quick jump to an individual target and do a couple quick stabs and then reassess. I'm thinking that if we have a character that is super mobile like this, you could sort of define the way that they play if you gave them an ultimate that is very short cooldown or has charges. So this is what I was talking about earlier, where we don't really have a whole lot of ultimates in the game that have multiple charges that you can use over and over. But what if this class, this Sicarian Ruststalker, this assassin, berserker type character has 3 pounces that he can do in sequence. So you could jump on a mauler and go stab, 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 and then you could jump on another mauler, stab, 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 and then you could jump out or jump to the back line or something. Being really, really aggressive like that, and just staying on the move. Because certainly we do, of course, have like the Zealot and the Charge, but that's a little bit more like honorable and frontline and, face me in combat. We want to be able to like pick out somebody at the back line and just jump straight to them and then start to hack and slash everything to pieces. For the Hive Scum, of course, they are very fast and very evasive, but they, again, aren't like confronting things head on here. They are dodging. They are mostly dodging and getting away. We want someone who is going to engage, but like engage selectively. So that could be pretty cool with the Sicarian Ruststalker, since they are like bloodthirsty murderers, and they're just going to go in there and just like cut all the organs out of somebody in like 1 second. And they could very well fit with the Transonic Sword, Transonic Knife. If you just got like, you pounce on a target and then that target takes like double damage from you for the next like 2 seconds or so, it could be a different look at, instead of having like a stealth character be your like, with a Shroud Field on the Zealot being like your, okay, I'm going to blow up this target sort of thing, you pounce on them and then you stab, stab, stab. So that could be a good idea for an archetype there. And I think that's probably the ones that, if I was looking over these books, I would pick out as far as really cool stuff to play around with. There is certainly so many awesome ideas here that they have to play with, and I'm certain we will see in a relatively small amount of time exactly what Fat Shark is cooking. Of course, if you have any ideas, if you think I missed anything in here, if there's some sort of weapon or something that you like are sure that they will include because it's just that core to the concept, or maybe you've got a better thought about what ability or what archetype you might be seeing, let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching so far, guys. Appreciate you. I'll see you next time. Mr. Real, bye bye.